Hello and welcome to the editorial analysis of the Hindu. Today we shall be discussing the editorial of the 7th of September. So coming to the first article, a bear hug. The context here is with regards to the India-Russia relations. We all know that Prime Minister Modi was on a bilateral visit to Russia for the East Economic Forum that was taking place in Russia. This East Economic Forum is an initiative of the President of Russia, Mr. Vladimir Putin, and it was here that Prime Minister of India was invited as a special guest, as the chief guest for this particular forum. So in this particular context, India-Russia relations become important. So coming to the analysis, first and foremost, we need to know about the forum itself. Now this is what was taking place in Vladivostok, which is in the far eastern region of Russia. That is that part of Russia which is coming largely in the Asian continent. So this is one thing. Another thing that is important here is that what are the decisions that have been taken. Prime Minister of India has extended a line of credit to this particular region for the development of this region to the tune of approximately $1 billion. Also, amongst several agreements, 50 agreements are what have been signed this week with Russia. These are primarily on energy exploration as well as procurement, and it also includes a specific MOU on cooperation on the LNG supplies, as well as several other initiatives are what have been taken in the context of Vladivostok. This is what is important. A 5-year roadmap for cooperation on prospecting for hydrocarbon as well as LNG in the Far East and Arctic. All of this is what has been decided. These are some factual aspects that you will have to know in the context of the East Economic Forum. But otherwise, basically, if you have been following my videos for long, you will know that just 1 week before Prime Minister's visit to Russia, an article on the expected visit had come, and that is where we had discussed that the far eastern region of Russia is that part of Russia which is comparatively lesser developed. And this is one region that is very, very rich in natural resources. And therefore, this is one region where India has high amount of opportunity to invest and explore, and Indian industries can go and get business out of this particular region. Also, the natural resources are what are required for India. So these are some important aspects which I had discussed. Another very important aspect which has been ignored in this particular article, but otherwise is important, is in the context of Indian diaspora. We all know that India will soon have its demographic dividend, and a large part of our population is educated but is not able to find employment. So for this population, these kind of regions are what are required. Vladivostok, the far eastern region of Russia, this is a region which is in need of manpower, skilled workforce as well as unskilled workforce. So people from India can migrate to this particular place and find employment, and that is again one relevance of this particular region. So this is one broader aspect of Russia's far eastern region that you should have an idea about why India is investing, and that is something that is a broader picture which you should know about. Another thing that is very, very important is the policy. The name of the policy is Act Far East. Previously, our policy was Look East. This is what Prime Minister Modi changed to Act East, and now the policy has been further changed to Act Far East, because in this particular policy now Russia's far eastern region is also included, and that is why this is something important. Now, sometimes what I see is that there are students who are preparing for this particular exam for many years, and what happens is that often when I correct papers, I see that students, probably if they have given a previous attempt in UPSC, they tend to write things which are of the previous year. No doubt that many things are what are a constant between, suppose, India and Russia only, if we are taking and we are discussing this. Several things will remain the same. But what happens is that you are mandated to talk about some current affairs in your answers. Like, this is a newer development that has taken place. The Act Far East policy is something that is new. So whenever now you are discussing about India-Russia relations, despite all the static part of the relationship, you have to talk about some current developments, and that is why you must mention about these kind of policies. This always will give a good impression in your answers, and please try and incorporate them. So that is one suggestion that I wanted to give you here. Another thing that is important is in the context of the economic ties between India as well as Russia. The ties are what are deep, they are something that are historic, but the economic ties are what are not so well developed. We only have a trade-off with Russia to the tune of only $10 billion, which is much less if we compare to several other countries. And this is something that has immense amount of scope for expansion, especially in the context of the defense deals. Past year itself, India's defense deals from Russia were to the tune of $14.5 billion, and there is scope for further expansion is what has been talked about. So this is one area that India needs to work upon, and if India develops in the far eastern region of Russia, this is what can be plugged and the economic ties can be improved. So that is important. There are strategic implications of this particular partnership also. First and foremost, energy from the Far Eastern region is what India will explore, and this is what is required for India, the liquid nitrogen gas, the LNG that has been talked about. All of this is what is very much in the interest of India, primarily because the West Asian region, which is the primary exporter of fuel for India, is somehow going through a period of instability, and this might impact India's fuel imports from this region, and India in this particular context needs to explore some other areas for meeting its energy needs, and Russia's Far East can be that region. So that is one strategic implication. Another thing is with regards to some trade routes through Russia. This is what is through Arctic primarily. This is what is very, very important. Now Arctic primarily previously was covered with ice itself. It was snow covered. So access in this region was negligible and it was not very important. But what is happening because of global warming is that the snow covered regions of Arctic are melting. And what is happening because of that is that large part of Arctic area is what is now being exposed, and this is one resource rich region where most of the countries are trying to make their inroads, because India is at a strategic disadvantage because it is very much distant from Arctic. So it will be important that India has good relations with a country like Russia, which can provide India ways or routes into the Arctic. So this is another strategic implication that has been explored under this particular East Economic Forum. Another thing that is important is with regards to some other players that are active in the Far Eastern region of Russia. Primary amongst them are Japan first and foremost. Also China is very active. China has made huge amounts of investment. India has only given a credit of approximately $1 billion, but China has already invested money to the tune of $33 billion is what has been talked about in this article, and that is something that is important. So even India should make its presence being felt here. Another thing that is important is that this is what will amount to reassuring Russia. Russia is one of our traditional partners. It's an old friend, and it is as of now wary of the India-US partnership. So if we are investing in this particular region, associating with Russia, then this is definitely going to increase the confidence of Russia, and that is what is also important. So the article is very, very relevant for India-Russia relations. You cannot talk about India-Russia relations without talking about the East Economic Forum as well as the Act Far East policy now. So that is where the relevance is. Coming to the next article, empowering primary care practitioners. Now basically this is again one very important article. This is context with regards to the health sector in India. Now basically the health sector in India is facing several challenges, and these challenges are what have been discussed from one particular point of view. This point of view is important and you must take it and you must talk about this also, but otherwise please don't make your answer all about this one point of view. The views expressed in this one particular editorial are strictly those of the author. They are relevant but not relevant enough to be accepted as a full-fledged answer. So that is one disclaimer that I wanted to give you before discussing. So coming to the analysis. First and foremost, you need to know the editorial is talking about an example of Japan. Now Japan here, he says, in Japan the health sector model is such that a prominent voice is given to the primary care practitioners in decision making, and this model of healthcare is very, very successful in Japan, and this is something that even India can emulate. So that is the first analysis which has been offered. Next, the editorial is talking about the model that India is following. Clearly India is not following this model. India's model is a hospital oriented model. It is a technocentric urban hospital oriented model. What happens in India is that if funds are what are coming, then these funds are going to the urban areas and they are not reaching down to the rural areas where majority of the people are living. As a result of which, what is happening is that urban hospitals are being developed, but primary health care centers are not developing at the same rate. The community based primary health care in India is one of the weakest, and that is one challenge that India is facing. Another issue in the context of India's model is that in India there is a very, very high degree of unregulated dual practice. What happens here is that the doctors are practicing both in public institutions as well as in private institutions, despite the fact that this is what is not accepted, this is not allowed, this is not legal. But despite that, the doctors are doing this, and as a result of which, what happens is that the doctors have an incentive to serve only in urban areas and not in the rural areas, and this is why again healthcare in the rural areas is one of the weakest in India. So that is what is important. Another thing that is important is with regards to the Ayushman Bharat scheme of India. Now this again, as we all know, is an insurance scheme which will be covering tertiary and secondary and tertiary healthcare sector. Now basically in this, insurance will be given for hospitalization again the editorial is discussing that this is also ignoring the primary health care. Another thing about this scheme is that this is only going to cover the hospitalization expenditure, but this is not going to cover the expenditure on medicines, which is often resulting in the maximum out-of-pocket expenditure, and as a result of which the impacts of the Ayushman Bharat are being questioned here, so that is important. Another thing that has been discussed in the editorial is with regards to family medicine as a discipline. Now basically this was advocated by the Bohr committee in 1946, where he had said that social medicine as a subject is what should be studied under family medicine, but this is what was not accepted despite the fact that the Bohr committee recommended it way back in the year 1946. This was what was finally accepted 37 years later, and it is after 37 years that family medicine finally became a discipline. And it further took more than 50 years after this particular recommendation for family medicine to become a postgraduate course in medicine as such. So that is one thing that has been discussed in the context of family medicine. Another thing is that has been discussed here is with regards to the Medical Council of India, which has now been replaced by the National Medical Commission. Now even the Medical Council of India, the editorial is saying, did not give much voice to primary care practitioners. Here also it was the specialists in the healthcare sector who were discussing and who were debating this, and who were at the helm of the affairs for decision making. So that is what has been discussed. Another thing that is important here is with regards to the mid-level providers. Now even if you remember, in the NMC bill, we have discussed this issue several times, that India has a need of another workforce, a workforce that is trained enough to provide primary health care, at least in the rural areas where health services are negligible almost. These mid-level providers are present in other countries. Other countries are following this model. For instance, if we take an example of UK, Japan is what has been given. Even for that matter, in the context of US, the editorial is highlighting that this model is what is being followed. And still, despite this model being a global success, Indian doctors, Indian specialists are not allowing this model to come in India. There's a program for a bridge course in Ayurveda, where Ayurvedic professionals would be trained to provide primary health care or basic health services. This again was something that was not supported by the specialists in the allopathic lobby. So that is what has been criticized here, and this is what is required very much. Another important analysis is with regards to the solution that has been offered in the editorial to all of these problems. The first solution that has been offered is that there is a need to reclaim health from the ivory tower approach of specialists, and this is what has to become all-encompassing. The primary healthcare providers have to be included in this. So that is the first solution. And the second solution, as I've just mentioned, that the voice of the primary healthcare providers is what should be heard, is what has been advocated in the editorial. So indeed, the editorial offers us one important point. Largely it's all around circulating about one single point, which is that primary healthcare is very, very important, and the voice of primary healthcare practitioners is what should be heard. This is one point which you can talk about whenever you are discussing health as such, and if you have an opportunity to discuss about primary health care, there also this article becomes important. But otherwise, please don't make your entire analysis all about this one particular article, is what my suggestion will be. So that's about this particular article. This will be important in General Studies Paper 1 under the health section in the syllabus. So that is where the relevance is. Coming to the next article, easing the pressure. Now basically this article is a continuation of the Hong Kong protests. If you remember, we have discussed an article on the Hong Kong protests. Please watch that particular video, because that is where I have discussed the historical aspect, the political aspect of this particular protest that were taking place in Hong Kong. These were against China. That article and that discussion was important, but the newer developments are what have taken place, and it is a continuation to that. So what is the important analysis? First and foremost, you should know that the protests were taking place for an extradition bill that was introduced by China, which meant that if anybody had done a crime in Hong Kong, that person could be extradited to another country, which also included China, which means if a person was standing or raising his or her voice against China in Hong Kong, that person could be taken and put in jail in China. So this is what the people in Hong Kong were objecting to. They were saying that this is what is unacceptable to them, and this was because of which the protests were taking place. Now this is the bill which has been withdrawn, and this is what has resulted in a pause in the tensions that were there in Hong Kong, and this is important development. You should know that China had even gone to the extent of setting up paramilitary forces in the Shenzhen city So this is now something that has been reversed, which is a good development. This revolution that has taken place in Hong Kong, several revolutions keep taking place in Hong Kong, several protests keep taking place in Hong Kong. All of that I had discussed in the previous article, so watch that video. But here what you should know is that this particular recent protest is what is being called as a water revolution. Here the campaigns are being raised for pro-democracy. Also, there is a demand for expanding the charter of demands for one country, two system policy. I had told you that when Hong Kong became a part of China, previously it was under the British, and therefore the economy in Hong Kong was clearly different from China. Also the system or the society functioning or the political rights were completely different from what were there in China. So when China took over Hong Kong, it agreed to a policy which was one country, two system policy, where it said that despite the fact that China is not a democracy, Hong Kong will be a democracy. Despite the fact that China is a communist country and Hong Kong is a capitalist country, Hong Kong will continue to be capitalist. So this is one model that was something that was implemented, and now more provisions are being demanded under this particular system. So that is what water revolution is all about. Another thing that is important is that Hong Kong has this special status till the year 2047. Now, because of this deadline coming soon, China has to be wary that these protests are what are contained, and people and the association of Hong Kong with China, or the assimilation of Hong Kong with China, is what is successful. So it is in this respect also that this particular bill has been withdrawn. So that is important. Another thing that is important is in the context of Taiwan. Now, seeing the example of Hong Kong, often what happens is that Taiwan is another area that is tense and that is not performing, that is not so well integrated with China and has aspirations of separated from China. So it might happen that these protests might have a spillover effect in Taiwan. So that is what has been discussed in this particular editorial. So that is one thing that is important. Another thing that has been discussed here is in the context of Hong Kong's economy, not very relevant for us, but still you should know that as of now, Hong Kong's GDP growth is what is not improving. It is stagnating. Its credit ratings have been reduced from AA plus to AA. So these are some impacts. The economy is going through a crisis, and all of this is what is leading to or fueling these protests that are taking place in Hong Kong. Now, basically, I would question directly. Otherwise, I personally feel will be rare, because largely UPSC has still now been focusing on India-related issues. But nevertheless, you are a UPSC aspirant, and some kind of basics are also some things that you should know. World affairs is something that you will have to be aware of. So this is important in that particular context. So this is the relevance of this particular article. And that's about our discussion today. These were the only 3 articles that were important. So I thank you all for watching the video.